When I was a kid and saw a Three Stooges video game on the shelves at my local Funko Land, I couldn't contain my excitement. As someone who loved both NES games and the Three Stooges, this seemed like a match made in heaven. Now, if you're wondering how two things separated by decades in existence, the Three Stooges and video games, came together, look no further than the Curly Shuffle. The Jump in the Saddle Band hit caused a huge resurgence in Stooges' popularity during the mid-1980s, resulting in tons of cash-ins. I already covered one of those cash-ins, Stooge Mania, on this channel previously.
I'm a victim of circumstance.
But there were also tons of merchandise and eventually this video game that came as a result. Though it was first released for Amiga in 1987, the game was later ported to the NES, and then the Apple II in 1990. It got another update in the early 2000s for release on PlayStation 1, followed by a version for Game Boy Advance. Lastly, it got a full remake for Windows in 2002. For a game with very little replay value, I'm surprised at just how much longevity they were able to squeeze out of this game. I haven't played it in years, but I'll never forget the first time I discovered it. The cover advertised a painfully funny adventure, with slapping, poking, and pie-in-the-face fun, as well as the Stooges' actual voices. I couldn't wait to get it home and embark on this exciting Stooges adventure. On the surface, the Three Stooges video game is a clever idea. The gameplay centers around the Stooges working various odd jobs to raise the money needed to save an orphanage. The odd jobs are framed as 10 mini-games within the game. And for those Stooge aficionados who noticed, yes, that is the same exact plot as the 2012 Three Stooges movie.
Yeah, what's it gonna take to save this place?
A lot of this.
Oh, well that's doable. How many boogers we talking about?
Although here it's more of a Depression-era setting versus the updated world in that movie. Some of the minigames cleverly pay tribute to the original Stooges shorts, while others are original to the game. Some of these minigames are fun, while others are a drag to get through. But I want to look back at all of the content in this bizarre game, in two of its versions, to highlight what it did right, as well as the things that I feel really hurt its replay value in the long run. So without further ado, let's hit start. Odds are if you remember anything about this game, you remember this title card. Even though it's close to 4 decades old, I still love this gag. It's so fitting with the Stooges brand of humor. I only wish there was more of this type of humor in the rest of the game. As the story begins, an evil banker has declared that Ma's orphanage will be foreclosed upon unless she can come up with $5,000 in 30 days. And the Stooges just happen to wander in and overhear. I do love how in the cover art, the evil banker character is represented by an image of Ted Healy. Whether intentional or not, it's a fun Easter egg in reference to the Stooges' actual relationship with Ted Healy. As was typical in the Stooges shorts, Moe, Larry, and Curly decide to save the day, and tell Ma that they will raise the money. We then cut to the most infuriating part of the game, the job selector. To select a minigame, you have to stop Moe's hand as it randomly moves across a board. You have 10 seconds to select a minigame, or else this happens. You can also accidentally land on the mousetrap as well. If Moe's hand gets caught in the mousetrap 4 times, the game is over. And as the game progresses, so does the speed of Moe's hand. While I understand the purpose of this system, giving the game a randomization element, it's pretty infuriating to use. And more often than not, you'll play one minigame and end up selecting the same minigame right after, being that there are only 10 options. It's so odd to watch the Stooges walk off one location, only to immediately wander back to it in the next screen. My favorite minigame is probably the oyster cracker eating contest, in which Curly must race to salvage crackers from a bowl of snapping oysters. It's a great game because it's based on an actual scene from Dutiful But Dumb, one of Curly's best. And the gameplay itself is pretty fun, as well as the implementation of real Curly sound effects. Another minigame inspired directly from a Stooges short is the boxing level. It's based on one of my favorite Stooges shorts, Punch Trunks. The short finds Curly becoming a boxing champion because he freaks out every time he hears Pop Goes the Weasel. In the short, Larry breaks his violin and has to race through the streets to find a radio playing the tune to help Curly win. The minigame is based on that scene, with the player controlling Larry on his race through the streets. Although in the game, every inanimate object possible is out to stop Larry. I'm pretty terrible at this one, as it's damn near impossible to work out the exact placement of these objects. Sometimes I think I'm clear of an object when this happens. Other times I accidentally speed Larry up and he smashes into something. If you make it back in time, you get rewarded by Mo, which is pretty odd because in the short, when Larry does make it back with the radio, this happens.
Now, little kiddies, Uncle Dan will tell you how Fuzzy Bear met Jerry Porcupine under the old hollow tree stump in the woods, right next to Peter Rabbit's gingerbread house.
Overall, it's a clever idea for a minigame that's just poorly executed in its design. It also wouldn't be a Stooges game without a pie fight, as another minigame pits the Stooges against 3 high society pie throwers. Again, the object placement is a little hard to make out, as you have to duck each Stooge as well as aim pie throws at the same time, switching back and forth amongst them. I'm also not sure how it makes sense that the Stooges are getting paid for each pie thrown. I guess these 3 are sadists who have some kind of weird pie fetish. Another minigame is the trivia level, which features a mixture of easy and challenging questions about the Stooges. The last proper minigame follows the Stooges racing through the corridor of a hospital in wheelchairs to collect medical supplies flying off a cart. The closest I could trace the inspiration for this minigame is this scene in Men in Black. So if that's the last proper minigame, what are the other 5 minigames made up of, you ask? Nothing. I'm not kidding. There's one, quote, minigame, which literally has the Stooges finding money on the sidewalk, ranging from $200 to $1,000. That's it. That's the minigame. It's like the developers ran out of time or something and just put in an option where there's free money. In another minigame, the Stooges receive a nasty note from the evil banker. I don't even know how these count as minigames. I mean, the box clearly said there were 10 of them. There's another where you control Mo and get to slap Larry and Curly, but there's no money involved, and there's only a combination of like 6 moves you can perform. It gets dull pretty fast. With there being 190 Stooges shorts, couldn't the creative team at least give us a few more games? What about a plumbing level where you have to connect the correct pipe pieces to flow water, based on a plumbing we will go? Or how about a golfing minigame based on 3 little beers? Since the developers chose such a poor system for minigame selection, they should have at least provided a greater variety of games to avoid getting stuck playing the same ones back to back, which happens a lot. There are 3 possible endings for the game. 5,000 saves the orphanage, 10,000 allows Ma to fix up the place, and 20,000 is such a great gift that Ma gives the Stooges her 3 daughters to marry. No questions asked. Overall, it's a fun game even though it has some problems, and it's worth playing at least once. But when I heard there was an updated version of the game for the PS1 and Game Boy Advance, I just had to check it out. Maybe some of these problems would be addressed. Well, for starters, this updated version is way more vibrant and visually pleasant to look at. The soundtrack and sound effects are also drastically improved, as well as a lot of the textures in general. I can actually play the boxing level and enjoy it now, as the object placement is so much better. All of the animations are overall better as well, especially in the Oyster minigame. But sadly, the core of the game stays the same, with the same broken minigame selection. The random money encounters are still there, as well as one where the banker charges you 10%. And then there are 2 new minigames, in that they took 2 existing minigames and just applied new textures and objects to them. For instance, the hospital minigame now has a grocery store counterpart, where instead of collecting hospital supplies, you're collecting groceries as they fly off a cart. And you can even make out people with broken limbs and wheelchairs still, only now they're carrying shopping baskets. The pie throwing game now has an Italian counterpart, identified by the most stereotypical Italian decor. In this version, instead of throwing custard pies, you're throwing steaming hot pizzas.
Oh boy, that's hot stuff.
These people really are kinky. And sadly, that's about all this game offers that is new. I looked into the second remake, but it looks like it's the same game yet again, just with entirely new animations. If they were going to go through the trouble to completely redevelop the game, couldn't they just throw in a little more content? Fortunately, this game has not been revived since. Playing it now, I'm reminded of being a little kid experiencing it for the very first time. Sadly, the game just never was able to generate that same level of excitement after that first playthrough though. Despite this, it's a pretty interesting game. A relic of a time when virtually every remotely popular franchise got its own video game. As for the game itself, it deserves to be taken out, in true Stooge fashion.
Wait a minute, wait, now look, go. Who threw that pie? Shut up, you're Oh! You forgot the duck.
So did you.